live now.
Sean's taking us live. We're good. We're live. I'm going to call this meeting to order. And we'll start with a moment of reflection. Thank you. You can make a disclosure of pecuniary interest now or at any point in time through the meeting. And if I could have a motion to confirm the agenda, which basically is only planning services. Moved by Councillor Wilhelm, seconded by Councillor McDermott. Those in favor? That would be carried. So we're going to move on to staff reports, planning services. And this is our education system on the natural heritage systems planning report. I think the last time we talked about this was like 3 years ago. So we'll get Sally on. I'm not sure if any of the other Susanna's on.
Yep. Sally and Susanna.
Afternoon, Sally.
Good afternoon, Warden and members of council.
We're ready to go.
Great. So Susanna and I are going to co-present today. We have a slideshow for you and presentation, and then we'll get into some questions and discussion.
Okay, and just before we get going, we do have a couple that have commitments at 3. So if we can kind of wrap it up before that, that would be lovely. But if we can't, we can't.
Well, we'll see where discussion leads us, I guess.
Perfect.
Okay, and is everybody able to see the slides?
Yep.
Okay, very good. All right. So we're gathered today to learn about natural environment and land use planning. We're working on updates to the official plan, as you know, and in there we're looking at updated mapping and for the natural environment designation and update to the policies that affect those lands as well. And we need to do those 2 pieces in order to finish the new official plan for Perth County. So in doing that, we're exploring ways in which the natural heritage study could be used to inform those updates. So policy is one tool that we use to keep the amount of natural environment that we have on the ground. And we have other tools like stewardship programming that are aimed more at sort of restoration or increases in natural cover over time. So that's a generalization, of course. But largely policy is about sort of keeping what we have and protecting it. So we're going to start today by talking about the why a little bit, like why do these policies exist and why is updating them important? And that will lead us into the how. So how are we going to go about updating this? How are we going to do public consultation? And we'll get into that piece a little bit later on. Following that, then we'll open it up to council for questions. And being that this is an education session for all of you, it's certainly our objective to learn about together, I think, what's being proposed and figure out what are each other's concerns, what are the things that we like. And then we can take that conversation and extend it into the public realm when we go into public consultation.
This is the agenda for the workshop this afternoon. So first of all, we'll talk about why, to offer context, why natural environment planning. Then we'll speak more specifically to the amount of forest coverage in Perth County. We'll move then to the planning policies and review the framework that informs planning for natural environment areas. Then we'll be more specific with regards to the mapping and policies that will address natural environment planning in the new official plan. Then we'll talk about the efforts that are proposed for community engagement. And then finally, we're looking forward to discussion with council. Some members of council will be familiar with the pioneering efforts of past Warden Monteith. The CBC article reports on the oldest reforestation reforestation efforts in Ontario. And this is a woodlot that was planted by past Warden Nelson Monteith in the early 1900s. Perth County is part of the Huron Tract that was colonized by European settlers under the auspices of the Canada Company, beginning in 1827. In 1883, 56 years after the Huron Tract was opened to Euro-Canadians, there was a massive flood in London, Ontario, which killed 17 people and left many homeless. During those first 56 years, there was a rapid loss of forest coverage as new settlers cleared the lands for farms and towns. At the time of the London flood in 1883, Nelson Monteith was 21 years old, and he was a student at the Ontario Agricultural College. He served as the reeve of Downey Township from 1894 to 1897 and was the warden of Perth County in 1897. Monteith then became a provincial member of Parliament, elected in 1905 as a Conservative member, and was appointed the Minister of Agriculture until 1908. He worked with others on reforestation test pilots in Perth County and the Oak Ridges Moraine, and his own farm in Perth South is cited as the birthplace of reforestation in the province. While Monteith was the Minister of Agriculture, the province developed a program of 400,000 free seedlings to farmers annually under a cooperative planting program. He contributed to securing and moving the expansion of the Provincial Reforestation Station to St. Williams, which created an extensive demonstration forest.
So learning from history, then we can work at the concept of valuing natural areas and their purpose and their sort of public good. A significant time in history around the time that Suzanne is referring to, and deforestation and the resulting circumstances that include serious flooding and certainly soil erosion. So what we glean from this historical perspective is that as we lose natural areas, our risk for loss of other important things also follows, and we see damages to property, to infrastructure, and to our valuable soil resources. This is a photo of St. Mary's in flooding on the Thames in 37. Deforestation at the time was fairly high, and the impacts were really being realized by communities and by farmers alike. It led to sort of an era of fairly costly infrastructure becoming more necessary, and dams like the one at Wildwood became more necessary. So 30 years after Monteith introduces sort of reforestation as a solution, that's re-emphasized and a serious push towards reforestation programs begin to unfold. This is a photo from 2017 in Ashfield Township, where I grew up, of a road washout due to flooding. And floodwaters arriving at a really fast rate due to upland and upstream landscapes. And this picture is pretty familiar to many of you, I think. This is a farm field, obviously, and certainly when we drive around last year, we saw more ponds that, where fields used to be. And it was a challenging year from a planting, a harvesting, and a manure spreading perspective. It seemed that spring, summer, and fall last year were wet, and that presented difficulties, it seemed, at every turn for field work getting done. And the fields that flood are the ones that are downstream from the fields where water's moving into those ditches really, really quickly. And there's very little at that point holding them back or sort of retaining them for any period of time. So when losses of natural area happens incrementally, though, it's really hard to see that the cumulative damage that's occurring and the risk that come as a consequences. So there's an opportunity, I think, here to shift into looking at a natural environment system as a whole, as an interconnected thing that provides a fair amount of public benefits when they're intact. And I think we can probably all agree that these areas are much harder to restore once they're lost than they are to protect in the first place. So the objective of land use planning then is to figure out how can development happen without negatively impacting the surrounding uses. So not unlike the concept of evaluating compatibility in an urban setting. How can both things exist with minimal negative impacts on each other because both things have value, the development project and the natural environment. We talk a lot, especially in Perth County, about protecting valuable prime ag lands, and natural environment plays a role here too. Soil erosion from water and wind increases as tree cover decreases. There's just a lot of research, pointing us in that direction. So these photos again are from where I come from originally in ACW, where the tree cover in this particular localized area is down around 7 or 8%. And again, looking at history, a fellow named Edmund Zavitz, he inspired and orchestrated many reforestation plantations in Ontario when soil erosion became such a huge concern and a huge issue. There's a book called 2 Billion Trees and Counting, and it's about Mr. Zavitz and he's a colleague of past Warden Monteith. And this book covers the story of rehabilitating agricultural lands through reforestation projects. A former colleague of mine always referred to this book as required reading for landowners and politicians alike. Before we leave this topic, I just wanted to point out there is a lot of information and good resources out there for landowners about the beneficial relationship between natural areas and soil retention. And a number of the communities actually come from the agriculture community as well as conservation communities.
So one of the, I think that one of the points we want to offer council is that natural environment features act as green infrastructure in the landscape. The landowner community north and east of Listowel has been collaborating with the Maitland Valley Conservation Authority on a series of stewardship efforts referred to as the Middle Maitland Watershed Project. And the photo on the right shows the type of projects that are in place in the area. So permanent cover along ditches and drains and open water courses, which both improves water quality as the water runs off the field and slows water down, which has an impact of slowing the water down as it moves downstream. So another impressive piece of green infrastructure is the Gdg Trail, which is a 127 kilometer long pedestrian or cycling trail running from Guelph to Goderich. And we're showing this slide here today just to present some out of the box thinking and ways that we can be conceptualizing the utility of green infrastructure in order to benefit both the people that live here recreationally and the local economy. So the stats on the screen there give you an idea of how many people are using the trail. In the summer months on the weekends, there are 200 to 300 people a day. Some of these people are local folks and some of them are coming from the urban centers. And the information that we've received from economic development from an organization called Ontario by Bike is that around 80% of the people who are traveling to the area from urban centers are spending $26 per visit, and 40% are spending more than $50. When people are coming for overnight visits, they're spending 5 times that much. So this is a fantastic example of the ways that we can be thinking about utilizing the natural environment resources that we have in the county to benefit everybody that's here. And I just draw your attention to the sign in the bottom left. 56 kilometers to Guelph. That is like the perfect distance. Is for a slow cyclist. It's the distance a person can travel in a day. It's a reasonable day trip. Sorry, for a fast cyclist, it's a reasonable trip. And for a slow cyclist, it makes an attractive destination. So somebody will be attracted by the opportunity to bike along off-road in a safe way and see what they can find out in our region. Oh, I just wanted to mention as well, I saw on Facebook this week that there is somebody who's planning a trip to along the Gdg, and they're looking for a place to stay in Moncton for the Easter weekend. So this is a significant opportunity for the local economy. So we're moving on now to the natural environment coverage in Perth County. And you can see here how Perth County compares to our neighbors. So if you look in the far right column, it's titled Total Natural Coverage. You can see that Perth County is at 12.3%. And this compares to Huron at 20%, Oxford at 16.8%. Middlesex at 21, Elgin just shy of 24%. And that total natural coverage is comprised of the information to the left in the other columns. So woodland coverage in Perth County is just a bit more than 10%. And then the other features that this data summarizes are wetlands, thicket covers, which are small shrubs, meadows. And then this is an important part of land use planning for natural environment features, is the connection that vegetation offers. So this could be water courses, or it could be strips of trees or shrubs that connect one discrete woodlot or a natural environment feature to another. So we just have a few air photos to show you about what does 12% look like. So here is a picture, an air photo of Perth County, and you can see that there are small woodlots generally at the back of farms, and they have been left there likely for a wood source when the farms were settled. And much of this rich agricultural land has been cleared and is being used for agricultural purposes. So the next slide shows, in some cases, the woodlots at the back of the farms are linked and joined together, which is, perhaps preferable ecologically. And then you can, I think the other thing that is significant to note in Perth County is that there are not that many large rivers. Like we are a flat area of the province. Now, if you move to the next slide, this is different than the top part of Huron County in the Maitland watershed. In Howick and the former Turnberry Township, the natural environment coverage is between 20 and 25%. So, and also of note, there are larger water courses in this part of the world. So I think when we look at the map of Perth County, and what this slide shows is the Conservation Authority jurisdictions that are in Perth. That Perth County is the headwaters of 5 watersheds, the Grand River and the Thames running to Lake Erie, and the Ausable, Bayfield, and Maitland rivers running to Lake Huron. That means that we are in the upstream part of the southwestern Ontario, which is generally flat land. And we recognize that Perth County is upstream to many, many farms and urban centers. And what we do has an impact on the downstream. Okay, so now we're turning to the land use planning framework. And this will then segue into the natural environment plan, specifically for the new official plan. So in Ontario, the province of Ontario provides jurisdiction to the municipality and to the County of Perth through the Ontario Planning Act. And what this means is that county council and the local municipalities have both the jurisdiction and responsibility to act as the planning authority. And the Ontario Planning Act itself requires that there be a provincial policy statement. And the provincial policy statement sets out the policy direction for planning in Ontario. So what this means is offering a policy direction as to what is considered good planning. And good planning at a high level means the intersection of protecting the economic livelihood of communities, the respecting and supporting social and cultural activities, while we acknowledge and protect the natural resources in our jurisdiction. So natural resources would include aggregate resources, natural environment resources, agricultural resources. So with this direction from the province, the professional responsibility of the planners is to provide and prepare a official plan for county council's review and decision. And that is the project that we're engaged in right now. So the Perth County official plan is in the county's jurisdiction, and then the 4 local zoning bylaws are in the lower tiers jurisdiction, the local municipalities. So the role of the natural environment plan is to use the policy direction that's provided in the provincial policy statements and see that mapping arrive in the local zoning bylaws. Because of the note on the right-hand side of the screen, that zoning bylaws are applicable law for the building code. So what we want to do is identify what is considered significant ecologically and ensure that at the time that someone is proposing a development or going to the building department to get a building permit, that there is a flag in the zoning bylaw that identifies that land as a natural environment area. So we wanted to highlight what the Conservation Authority's role is and make a differentiation between natural environment areas and natural hazard planning. So what we're talking about today is natural environment planning, which is also referred to as natural heritage planning. They're used interchangeably. And natural environment includes woodlots, wetlands, valley lands, areas of natural and scientific interest, wildlife habitat. So the Natural Heritage System Study, which was prepared by the Conservation Authority and which Council has received in advance of the meeting today, defines what is considered ecologically significant. And again, that definition comes from the PPS. The natural environment features are protected by the provincial policy statement, the Perth County official plan, and the local zoning bylaws. And the conservation authorities have ecologists on staff who may advise when an environmental impact study is required and review the environmental impact study when it's submitted. So that is different from natural hazards. Natural hazards include flood-prone lands, so areas that are within the floodplains, erosion hazards, and while we don't have any Great Lakes in Perth County, the shorelines of the Great Lakes are also considered natural hazards, as are wetlands. And the development in these areas is regulated by a separate piece of legislation referred to as the Conservation Authorities Act. And Conservation Authorities are regulatory staff are responsible through the Conservation Authority Acts for reviewing development applications to determine if a permit is required in these natural hazard areas. So Sally, if you just clicked one more time, this is what we're talking about today. We're not talking about natural hazards. We're talking about natural environment. So the provincial policy statement, then what it does is it focuses on the different types of natural environment features. So these include significant wetlands, woodlands, valley lands, wildlife habitat, and areas of natural and scientific interest. And what the PPS requires is that the planning authority, in this case, the County of Perth, identify natural environment systems. So at the time that development is proposed, an environmental impact study could be required in order to determine if development in or adjacent to a natural environment feature will have any negative impact on the natural environment feature. So that's the language in the provincial policy statement that's echoed in the Perth County official plan, is an evaluation of whether or not development will have a negative impact on the natural environment feature. And of note, cropping, grazing, and drainage are not considered development. So these activities are not informed by the proposed official plan. So in order to satisfy the provincial, to define, I guess, what is a natural environment feature and what we are considering to be significant, We are referring to, or the Upper Thames referred to, the Natural Heritage Reference Manual. And this is a lengthy document that does the work of defining when a natural environment feature, when a woodlot is considered significant. So this has been done. We have created the natural environment system study, and that checks the box of responding to the provincial requirement that we define what features are significant in Perth County. So with this information, just click a couple more times, we will be taking this information, or we are taking this information over to the mapping in the Perth County official plan. And that is used then to inform the designations. The current plan that we have was approved in 1997, and we know that the existing natural environment designations are dated. So that is the mapping that is in the official plan now. There are natural environment designations, and we know that natural environment features, woodlots and wetlands, by their nature are dynamic. They change. They're planted, they're removed, the land use changes, trees come, they grow. So they all change. And as the county is updating the mapping, updating the official plan, it's necessary to update the mapping in order to reflect correctly what is on the ground. And this effort will both bring transparency to property owners, and it also works to protect the natural environment features.
So one of the things that we get from the mapping as we translate it across is that it was prepared at a landscape level, and we have the opportunity then to look at it at a field level and try and assess, how well it's reflecting the features on the ground. And when somebody comes along for a building permit or a planning application, is when we can sort of dig a little deeper and make sure that the full extent or limitation or the full boundary of that feature. So we've mapped a natural system in Perth. That's where we're at the moment. And what's the action attached to that? So when that map is then part of an official plan, somebody arrives with a development proposal, and we look at where the buildings or the lot creation or subdivision is in relationship to the natural system that's been mapped. And as Susanna mentioned, development means buildings, excavation, and lot creation or subdivision. So it's important to understand that right now in our official plan today, we have identified many of the ecologically significant things already, but not all of them. And that's where the new mapping helps us update. Our official plan also has identified that adjacent land is 120 meters for some things and 30 meters for others. So adjacent land is that space beside an ecologically significant thing where it triggers the need to evaluate the impact that the development may or may not have on the ecological function of that feature. And the provincial recommendation is that you evaluate impacts within 120 meters of all of the significant features and landscape features in your system. So let me give you a concrete example. Yesterday, I was talking to a fellow who is proposing an addition to his barn. And this guy's been through the gamut of things. He did his nutrient management plan. He prepared MDS. His farm is located fairly close to a school. He had hazard lands on his farm and he needed to work through those details with the Conservation Authority. He has done a lot of due diligence in preparing for this addition. And all the boxes were checked, really, except for one, the lesser known one, the one that we don't talk about as much, or that is not really on the radar of all the folks involved in the system. And that's the natural environment one. And in our official plan today, it says that within 30 meters of a woodland where development is proposed, you would go through this action of evaluating the potential impact from that building on the woodland. And so, this fellow was feeling like he had done so much already. And yet when we talked about this policy in the official plan and what it means and the actions required, he still had quite a sense of due diligence, but he needed to understand, how to achieve it. He needed some facilitating on some information on the logistics of how to get to the next stage. So we pulled together a list of ecologists in the area that do a lot of work in Perth County. We gave him a list and we talked about scope. And that's really, really important, that the scope of his, his study is relative to the development that he's proposing. And so what I anticipate is then that he will talk to a few of these ecological specialists, talk to them about scope, and then we can have a conversation about that. And then he will go about the study and come back and it will inform, not only the potential impact that he might have, but it might also even offer information about mitigation strategies, if in order that the building could be where it's proposed, while limiting its impact on the natural environment system. So another example recently was a severance about a month ago, within 30 meters of a woodland, again, sort of same scenario. It was proposing one lot, no new buildings, no physical change on the ground at all. The ecologist was consulted and advised that no further studies needed. So in that case, the EIS was scoped appropriately to the development, and we moved on in the planning application process. So these experiences of real developments, I think, help us to develop a more practical, scalable set of planning tools for the new official plan that's aimed at figuring out how both things can exist, because again, both things matter. As we plan for the public engagement, we're using these experiences as a set of concerns that we've received and heard over time to help us build a public engagement that is realistic, I think, with the resources that we have available, and will help us have meaningful conversations with landowners about how this system works how it works today and how it works once we update maps and when we update the policies. So the job then is to get the word out about the map and about the policy updates and really work towards having that meaningful discussion with folks. So that brings us to the methods that we're proposing for the engagement with the public, and to a certain degree, ground truthing the map, because really once we move the map or the mapping, we take what we have learned, what we've sort of bought and paid for in terms of information about what is ecologically significant in Perth County. And once we bring that mapping into the official plan, it sort of becomes a different tool. We can ground truth. We can take that landscape level lens and try and refine it and finesse it a bit to a more of a field level understanding and representation. And so these are the kinds of things that we want to talk about and learn and refine through public consultation. So the overall, the overall need that we know is that the official plan is really needed for a large number of very important reasons. And so time is of the essence when we're talking about the official plan. We also have a fairly small team of people here to pull this all together. So we need to be really efficient with our methods. And that has really, I think, gone into designing this particular set of tools for a meaningful engagement in Perth County. So we're going to learn from the fellow with his barn edition over the next couple of months. At the same time, we can bring a similar learning opportunity to more people, I think, by hosting a field meeting rather, where people come and we walk through a realistic example of a development proposal in adjacent lands territory in an actual setting. I think the outdoor possibilities would also give us some ability to carry on if there are particular restrictions with the pandemic that we're in right now. So, you know, a plan B would of course be webinars. We would attempt then to go and sort of video the same experience and then bring that video along with discussion and interaction to a webinar setting instead. So there's some flexibility built in here for what we might find occurring at the point in time when we're ready to deliver the workshop, whether that we get to do that in a field setting or in a webinar setting. I think what would be interesting in a field setting is that, you know, we could flag out 30 meters, we could flag out 50 meters, we could even flag out 120. And so we would really be able to have a conversation about environmental impact studies. We would be able to have a conversation about the adjacent lands, and we would be able to maybe even talk to some folks who've gone through an EIS and hear some of their experiences. I did do a run through of like when I was really sort of in the beginning of trying to figure out what tools we would use for consultation. I did spend an evening with about a dozen farmers last summer and ran through some of the concepts to see if there was concerns out there that I hadn't really heard of or considered yet. And the questions that came that night were very insightful. The small group was really helpful in that we could learn a lot from each other because people were feeling fairly free to speak, to you know, lay out their concerns. And so it was pretty valuable. And I would like to repeat that with other groups and also with the Woodlot Owners Association. So during that meeting, actually, I even had an offer from one of the folks there to help with consultations. So perhaps, you know, that's a resource for coordinating a field meeting. We've talked a bit about letters too, and a real desire to send letters to folks and really put it in their hands that a map is changing. And so I proposed that we could use letters in two ways. One being certainly to spread the word and to get a link to the map viewer that we're building into people's hands and have them really visiting that site and exploring what the map looks like today, what it will look like or what is proposed to look like in the new OP, and highlight visually what's being added, what's being removed, and what's staying the same, so that people can get a sense on their property or in properties around them. Certainly the fellow with the barn addition, the woodland that he's relating to now is actually on his neighbor's property. So those, to get that word out is certainly one achievement that the letter will help us get to. But I think it also serves to help us with a bit of ground truthing. So essentially, we would, a letter would arrive at someone's house. They would be invited to the website where they can interact with the map. They would see the old, the new, the removals, the ads. The website would also walk them through a frequently asked questions about natural environment planning and what an EIS is and what does it mean? When does it apply? When does that trigger kick in? And it would provide them with a forum to give feedback and ask questions. And they will also be invited to request conversations with staff if they prefer, like a one-on-one question answer. Can you help me with the map? Can you help me understand why the map is identified this particular spot as significant ecologically? And we want to be able to have those conversations, because there's a lot of value in explaining what this looks like what does land use planning, what does that system look like? How does it affect them? But also because we get to hear from them, we get to hear what is a worry, what seems to make sense. It helps us figure out whether or not 120 meters seems like a lot to people. And so we can record, the feedback that we get and then report it back to council for more discussion with you, and also to help you with your decision making. So we looked at the map that we have from this study, and where new areas were identified that aren't already in the official plan, we created a list of the owners of each of those properties. And we also narrowed it down to areas where the map was changing by greater than 1 acre or greater than 1%. And that is a list of around 2,700 people. So what's being proposed then is a letter sent to 2,700 folks. The way I think that serves the ground truthing is that the people who own the property, who know it best, are actually receiving a direct mail to say, this map is proposed to change in the official plan. Would you come to the website and have a look at it? Get in touch with us if you think it's not quite right, or get in touch with you if you have questions. We want to talk to you one-on-one, and we want to come out and have a look whenever necessary. And we want to be able to use this letter chain to identify when there's something that's been identified in the map that just isn't there. And I would say meadows are maybe a candidate for that more often than the other ecologically significant features, just because they tend to change at a faster rate than some of the other features. Oops. Did the screen that just changed there for you all?
Yeah, I did.
Okay, is it back to normal?
Yeah, it's back.
Okay. What staff is also proposing is that we go through the meadows layer in detail, sort of property by property, and compare it to some of the newer photography that we have, and where it's been identified, because maybe at the time it was mapped, it was a hayfield, and that may have been captured as a meadow, or a pasture. A grazing pasture is another good example that we could see that it's now an annual cropping, and we could record that change and edit the map. So we anticipate from our 2,700 letters about a 10% response rate of people directly contacting us. We've based that on an experience in Huron County, where they've repeated this now 3 times in different lower tiers. And we have 3 people available here on staff who would work part-time on those, returning those calls or setting up, appointments could be set so that people would know, when we're going to be able to get back to them. I think that makes our ability to respond to people like more timely, and also gives them an expectation of when we'll get to have this conversation. They won't just be waiting, if call volumes are high, which we'll probably go through periods of highs and lows. And I mean part-time, because these 3 folks are people who are here working on other things at the same time. So it would be myself. We have a PhD student now on staff throughout the summertime, and the person that we would end up hiring to work on the official plan full-time. So those 3 people would be specifically prepared to have conversations one-on-one, to do site visits, and to keep a record of any edits to the mapping that were made through this ground truthing process. So we definitely intend to do site visits when people ask. And if we run into scenarios where either we can't answer the questions or there's a difference of opinion on the natural area or why it's been identified as significant, then we will need to have a resource available to seek some third-party expertise. And so council received from me a budget item for that expense. And I'm sort of putting it in the category of a ground truthing expense for our official plan exercise. And we would go through like a procurement process to make sure that we had some ecological support on retainer that we could call in, and we would have a set program for them to follow where they would go to the site, evaluate it, bring their GPS and refine the actual boundary of the thing and provide a report back to the landowner and the county. So that would again help us to sort of ground truth the map and work through. It's really boils down to like a learning exercise with individual property owners, where they've received something that's defined on a map, but when they get a chance to talk to the ecologist, they find out that there's, they might find there's interesting things about that particular feature or landscape item that that they didn't know before. So what I want to do though is reiterate that the online viewer and the forum would be available to absolutely everybody, and that a digital book has actually already been created. So that if someone receives the letter and doesn't use the internet or can't get online, that they can simply phone us. We would go into that digital file, we would pull out the page reflecting their property, and we would print it out and get it to them. So we hope that we've kind of covered the basis on access for people. And we'll certainly want to use social media to invite people to the website, to invite people to the webinar or field workshops. And I think in my proposal to you a couple weeks ago, I proposed 2 field workshops. And I think, once we have it produced, it's repeatable. So we would have to sort of gauge interest from there, and whether 2 was gonna be enough. And the objective really of public consultation is to answer people's questions, to get their opinions about the map and the policy, and use their feedback, and build a good system that, like I said before, is sort of practical and is scalable, so that we can then arrive back at a place where we are able to meet those sort of the targets set by the PPS, update our current official plan map to a system, because right now it's really reflective of only features, a collection of features, and have a policy in place that talks about the adjacent lands and the requirements for an EIS, and identifies the scalable nature of an EIS and how to go about that, so that we can feel more confident about the system that we're trying to build here, and that council will be able to make some decisions about that piece of the OP, because as you know, we have a lot of pieces of the OP that we need to make, that I need to bring you information on so that you can make decisions about those things. And the public consultation, I think, targeted to natural environment will help us get much closer to that, to what that should look like in the OP, than perhaps we have been to date.
Just some summary points then. I think a big take-home message is that natural environment has value. And what the planning department is working on is incorporating the natural environment features that are that have significance ecologically into the official plan so that they can be protected. As Sally mentioned, there'll be a further investigation of meadows using the 2020 air photos. And that is because the document that was prepared by Upper Thames is prepared at a landscape level. So we want to do that additional review with an air photo analysis at the planning department, by the planning department. As Sally has just reviewed, this consultation work will be augmented by letters to landowners and field visits where required. We're intending to engage with the public so that we can bring back a final policy and mapping for the new official plan incorporating the natural environment policies. Just to remind you where we're at with the official plan, we have now completed the preliminary public outreach. All of the required background reports have been completed. And at this point, we're drafting the official plan with the anticipation that the draft will be ready in the spring. At which point we'll be doing public outreach just on the natural environment specifically, and also broader outreach with regards to the entire project. With the anticipation that we will have a finalized document in the fall of this year to bring to council before the end of your term. While I was preparing on this presentation, I was reminded of the adage, the best time to plant a tree was 100 years ago, and the second best time is today. Nelson Monteith was brought into the Ontario Agricultural Hall of Fame in the year 2000. And what we're looking to is supporting this level of interest and engagement in reforestation and passing that vision on to the young people that are in our community. This is a tree planting project in the Maitland Valley watershed behind the Listowel High School. So that is all that we have prepared today as our formal presentation, and we're really looking forward to the discussion.
So perfect. I'm unmuted. We're back to the screen. So at this point in time, what questions do we have from counselors on what we've just heard from Sally and Suzanne? And I see Councillor Herlich's hand waving, so I'll start with you.
Yeah, no, good. There we go. No, I recall
Just
back
before you
when,
keep going, Daryl, could I ask you to talk down to the computer so you don't cut out on me here?
can you hear me good there?
Right there is good.
Okay, I won't move. All right. Yeah, no, it's interesting though. We have these talks here, and back 2.5 years ago when we were on this topic, I recall, and I freshened up here, you know, the meadows, the thickets, the connective features, those are non-mandatory. And we had lengthy discussion on that. Farmers came in, residents as well. I'm just thinking we add all this stuff in there. Like, you know, we're putting in an addition on the courthouse right now, but gosh, it's going to be triggering studies continuously. Respectfully, like as much as, you know, I have windbreaks, and I know many people do have windbreaks, but I do assure, you know, that we're getting by okay the way we are, and we want to encourage windbreaks to continue. But once people know that basically every time they go to do something, 120 meter setback, that's a lot. Even a 50 or 30 is enough. But now that we're recognizing thickets and meadows and the connective features, that is not mandatory by the provincial policy statement. We're going too far. It's a lot. It's very heavy. The natural hazards, what the conservation authorities are involved in, we all understand that, and that's good. That's good work right there. Boy, oh boy, like my farm's not a zoo. I'm sorry, respectfully, and I have my concerns that we do not need to be stepping into these thickets and meadows and all these other features that are non-mandatory. Thank you.
Okay, just before we move on from that question, I'm going to let Sally respond to that about the thickets in the meadow. Or Susanna.
Yeah, I maybe like 120 meters is a must. It's like the language is must or shall for certain features, like a provincially significant wetland. And maybe that's not the number that we'll end up with at the end in our OP for the other features. But before we skip to a number, I think we should have a reason. We should have a justification for what number we do land on. And so I would like, you know, us to work through getting to that point. And with respect to the meadows, I think we have a pretty good plan here to ground truth some of that stuff, because they do change quite rapidly. And I think, you know, the premise here is that the ecological significance of those features hasn't changed, whether or not the level of protection is there. And so before we decide, or before you decide rather, that there's something in here that you may want to splice out, I think it's important that we have a bit of time to explore what people think about its value.
Okay,
Could I just make another comment,
Sure.
Mr. Warden? I think what we would like to emphasize is that we are developing an online mapping viewer. So Councillor Herlick, you would be able to see what the mapping is proposed for your specific property, and likewise all the other properties in the county. And I think that at that point, then we'll be able to have concrete conversations. The natural heritage system study has been prepared at a landscape level. And then we have a robust process in place for doing the ground truthing exercise, and staff will be available in order to have those conversations on a one-to-one level. So what we're doing at this point is we have the document, we're integrating it into the OP, and then there'll be a map viewer so we can look at specific properties, and we haven't done that yet.
okay, and I'm just gonna interject before I go to the next hand. If I heard Sally correctly, that 120 meter setback from woodlands does not affect cropping, correct?
Sorry?
The 120 meter setback from woodland does not affect cropping.
No, what we're talking about here is lot creation, excavation, and buildings. So when those three things are proposed, that's when it would trigger the need to evaluate. And the point of our exercise here and public consultation is, yeah, there's a list of things that we, categories of things, valley lands, wetlands, woodlands, and they have all been determined as ecologically significant. We have an opportunity though to refine the map through some ground truthing, and we have an opportunity where the language in the PPS isn't must or shall. We have an opportunity to discern what is an appropriate width for that adjacent land area.
Okay, perfect. Deputy Warden Haggett, you had your hand up.
Well, just further to what Daryl's asking, were any of the non-mandatory items taken out, or has everything been left in? Like, we had that meeting there 2.5, 3 years ago, and I thought we were getting rid of everything that wasn't mandatory. Did that come out, or did everything stay?
There is a version of the map that reflects that conversation, but I don't have a strong clarity on how you arrived at what you're calling mandatory versus not mandatory. Like, what rationale has the council arrived at for leaving certain things off the list as being protected as part of an ecologically important system?
Well, when you start figuring out, you know, I'll use our farm as an example. We have 200-acre parcels. One's bare, no buildings. For some reason, they have part of it as a wetland, which it is not. So if we wanted to build a house, and it had been looked onto this at this 100 acre, the house has to go in the middle of the farm. We talk about saving agriculture land, and yet here we have to put a laneway down the center of our farm to get the house to go in there. So my problem is we're going to start putting these thickets, these bushes, these whatever, all over people's farms that have really never been there. To me, a thicket doesn't have a big impact, but maybe it has more than I realize. But we're going to really tie people's hands of where they can build, what they can build. Same with our ditches. You know, they want us not to be able to plant a crop up to our ditch. Who's going to compensate us for that land? Like, we have a municipal ditch that runs the full width of one of our farms and back halfway between the farms. And now you want me to take out 5 acres of cropping, and it's going to be weeds, and those weeds are going to spread all over everybody's farm. Like, I have a little problem with that. We're going to do that, or maybe I don't understand where this is all going, but that's my understanding of what's going to happen here.
Well, through you, Ward Aitchison, if you'll
Yep.
I may respond. If you're cropping, let's talk hypothetically. If you're cropping up to the ditch right now on your property, then at the time the map was developed, there would have been nothing there that would have been captured as ecologically significant. So if you didn't have an existing, wide riparian area that was permanently vegetated, the map wouldn't have picked it up. So using this map going forward, I don't think you will see that area identified as a candidate for protection through this policy. And the policy would not prevent cropping. So you would, even if you were proposing to crop that land, it's the policy around natural environment and protecting it from development. It wouldn't be triggered by you wanting to crop or graze or even drain that area. And respectfully, I think we looked at the mapping on your property and there wasn't, there is a wet spot certainly, but it wasn't captured by the map. So what I'm offering through the mapping tool, the mapping viewer, is that people can go and look at how the map is or isn't changing on their property. And you can inquire, I don't really understand why the map's changing here. I don't know what the natural feature is that it has captured, or yeah, that's that was a paddock in 2015, but it's not anymore. We can refine the map because the policy itself is about development. It's about buildings, excavations, and lot creation, and more specifically subdivisions. But if say 5 years from now, even we've gone through this process, we've refined the map to some degree, we've got an official plan in place, and you did or didn't participate in the public engagement, but 5 years from now, maybe you newly purchased that property. And I'm using an example that I talked with the counselor about yesterday. You arrive at the property, you want to build a barn or a shed, an implement shed, and there is a natural, the location you've identified for your shed is in the adjacent lands. Let's say it's 40 meters or 30 meters to a wetland or a woodland. Then what this would do is actually trigger the requirement for you to go through the motions, through the action of evaluating. It doesn't mean that the building can't go there. It doesn't mean that there's not an automatic, no-fly zone. It's a trigger that you take an extra step, you figure out if there's any impact there. If there is, can it be mitigated? And like I said, it's meant to be scalable. So if you're proposing an addition on a barn, in theory, it wouldn't require the same level of scrutiny and study that an entire subdivision would. I think it's also important to note that if you propose to build something and the map shows that there was natural environment within 50 meters. And you come forward with your proposal and I say, okay, well, the map here shows that you're within 50 meters of this thing. It's ecologically significant. That triggers the need for a study. And you say, I actually don't think the distance is right, or that thing is there anymore, or that the map has captured it correctly in the first place. then we simply go out and have a look. If a feature is not there, then a study will not be required. Likewise, if we go out and there is a feature there that wasn't captured by the map, the study is required. It's triggered. So it's important that we build a system, a land use planning environment where there is flex, there's practicality, and there's scalability, so that, yeah, you have to study and maybe it's not that big, or maybe you're proposing one lot and the study is waived entirely.
I think you've made some great points, Sally, and just for clarification, so back to the ditches, like you said, if it's not already there, the crop already goes to the ditch, it can stay like that. And that, I guess that wasn't my interpretation of this. Is that correct?
Well, if it wasn't there when the study was done, then I don't see how it would have been identified as a significant ecological riparian area, because it would have been corn or beans or whatever at the time.
Right. I guess my thinking was, though, we had to allow so many feet from that drainage ditch for that couldn't be crop. But you're saying it can be.
Well, there's nothing about this, and I think I'd like to also draw your attention to the section 2.1 of the PPS that I gave you. Nothing about protecting the natural environment system is meant to prevent cropping, grazing, like regular field practices. So by adopting the map and putting it into our official plan and saying, when you develop something within whatever number we land on, 70 meters of this thing, you should do an evaluation. None of that gets us to talking about cropping or preventing cropping or stopping cropping. That's not what this policy is aimed at all.
Because I think that's part of the misconception that's out there. I really do.
Okay, that's really valuable.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Councillor Duncan.
Two things. When will the mapping be available online, Sally? And question number two is, so if a study was required to develop something within the number of meters we decide on, what would that study entail? Like, is it a situation where, the proponent has to provide some sort of offsetting somewhere else on their land? Or is it just, you can't build, say, 30 meters from the woodlot, but you could 50 because of a certain species of tree or wildlife or animal that could be there? Like, what would the study entail?
Yeah, it's more the latter, that the study, and I'm not expert at this, so perhaps it's something that we could have, one or two different ecologists come in and explain what they do exactly for you. But the ones that we see in-house is sort of where I'm getting my information from, the ones that we've seen through development applications. And they're looking at a direct relationship between what's being proposed and the things about that feature that make it ecologically significant, whether that's habitat, whether that's stormwater management, or whether that's like you say, a specific species of tree or animal that's endangered or what have you. It's more of a direct relationship, and evaluating the direct relationship between those items and the function that they perform in the natural landscape, and how is this building going to affect those things, and how far away would you have to be to not affect them? Or is there some mitigating thing, like you could get closer by 10 meters if you did X or if you did Y? So it's really an informative process about how the two things can coexist. And that's really what we're trying to get to, because like I've said it before, like both things matter. The natural environment system really matters, and so does the development. you know? And so it's, for me, it's a little bit like an odor study or a noise study in town. It's like, we want to make sure that the two things can coexist. So let's contact an expert on the one thing, and figure out if there's anything about the design or the location of what's proposed that will enable both things to occur. And your other question was about the mapping. And we have been working with GIS on it. Leading up to Christmas, we were working on it pretty steadily, and we do need to pick it up again and get it really prepared. There's still a fair bit of work to just create that viewer platform and sort of package it for the public. And so it's probably in the neighborhood of weeks, not days, certainly. And I don't have an exact date for you, but it is sort of our next priority because we want to start the natural heritage consultation as soon as we can.
Councillor Kassenberg.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. Thank you to both Sally and Susanna for your presentations. I just want to make sure that I'm following this with some clarity. So, and this is further to questions that Councillor Duncan was asking. When we move forward and this scheme is in place with regards to maintaining setbacks associated with development, sheds, barns, homes, things that you've been talking about, and the standbacks from natural heritage features. The indication that I'm picking up is that there's a set of guidelines proactively saying you really should stay 70 meters back, 30 meters, whatever that magic number is. And then there's sort of but if you're going to try to do differently, like if you're going to try to get into that setback zone, then we may need to trigger a formal assessment that we add essentially to the mix. And maybe it's not an addition because maybe that's happening now, but I'm speculating here that we add to the mix. And of course, there'll be a cost to the proponent of the application. So I'm kind of I'm not all that intimately aware of the costs right now of odor studies and noise studies. I know I've seen them at our council table, but I'm curious about the kind of costs that might be expected from one of these studies if in fact it is invoked in a particular application.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't think I could give you a reasonable, range of costs, but it's certainly something we can look into and find out. And maybe, again, like hearing from an ecologist would be perhaps helpful to council. Someone who does this kind of work and how they work with landowners and how they evaluate things and what does it cost. But like a survey, the range is hot, the range is wide. It's probably fairly site specific. We want the system to allow for scalability. So there's going to be a wide range of cost as well. And I think one of the things, basically what you said leads, it sounds to me like you get it. You understand sort of how it works or how it's intended to work. And the fact that it's already what we do. It's already in our official plan. What we're talking about here is sort of bringing it up to date, doing a better job of identifying things that are ecologically significant in the first place, and then reevaluating what our adjacent lands should be. Like, what's the number? That's really what we're talking about.
Okay. Councillor Kassenberg is another one.
Just a brief sort of supplemental comment. And I think that Deputy Warden Eggett's comments are really valuable because I think what she was talking about is the importance of communication here and that there may be some significant understanding challenges associated with any action that's associated with looking at the natural environment in an official plan. And I think that, from what I'm hearing, it sounds as though there is misconception that somehow farmers are going to be stopped from doing their legitimate business and having access to the totality of their property for farming purposes. And basically what I've heard so far, and please put limitations or clarifications in place, is that generally that's not true. That what we're focused on here is the impacts of human-oriented development on agricultural and in agricultural spaces where there are natural heritage features or natural environment features that are worthy of consideration. Am I roughly right?
Yep. Yeah, like, and I think certainly the goal is to clear up misconceptions, but I think also the goal is to talk to people and see, like, is there something that we missed? Is there something, some scenario someone could provide to us that we would learn from before we nail this down? And that's kind of what I'm excited about getting into. And the challenge, of course, is being able to have the conversation in a really constructive way, where we can hear from those people that they're, you know, that they're not reluctant to come forward, you know, because maybe they think we won't want to hear them, or that they heard something and they're just going to go with what they heard rather than sort of confirming. So I really do aim this public consultation at clarifying misconceptions, but I don't want to be so naive to think that I've got it all sorted either, and that there might not be something else out there that we need to consider.
CAO Lori Wolf has her hand up.
Thank you very much through the warden. And it's been a great presentation, great questions about the communication piece, how important it is, because council, you have passed your public engagement framework. And so if you recall that, we had inform, consult, involve, collaborate, empower, and this goes all the way up to collaborate, where we're working together with our stakeholders to find the solution that's going to inform you when you make your municipal decision. So this is key for Sarah, who will be working very closely with Sally and her team to make sure that we do a top-notch job on communicating this to the residents and our affected stakeholders, so that council can be informed when they make their decision, and they can be satisfied that we've done our due diligence as staff in order to communicate this to the public in that collaborative fashion. So it's a great opportunity for us to, you know, I don't want to say launch our public engagement framework, but it really brings it to the top, where you are exemplifying taking that extra step to actually collaborate and work with the community as opposed to just inform. So it's going to be great.
Councillor Wilhelm has his hand up there.
Thank you. I guess further to Deputy Warden Agat's comments, and I was hoping that was what the meaning is. However, I do have a concern that under our natural heritage 3.3.3, and it says that vegetation group within 30 meters of an open water course, which is riparian vegetation, are affected by the water. Open water courses contain flowing water for at least part of the year. So that's basically all open ditches and everything. And in our natural heritage, we're saying it must be 30 meters. So, but yet you're telling Councillor or Deputy Warden Agats that no, you can work right, a farmer can work right up to the edge of the open ditch. Yet in our natural heritage, it's saying the opposite.
But I'd like to go and find the exact wording and read it. But what I think it says is that the 30 meters of width of vegetation, permanent vegetation along a water course is sort of ideal when it comes to water quality and water retention. But when I look at the map that was created from the model, it hasn't captured 30 meters along every watercourse and every ditch. So the map does not have that in it, identifies as currently today an ecologically significant part of the system. And the policy that we're looking to put in place applies only to those things that have been identified today as ecologically significant. So I will go back to that section and have another look. That's my explanation about the study itself and it identifying that 30 meters width is ideal. And how the study is used to create a map, like when the model is run, despite the technical documents saying this is a really important thing to strive for, to achieve, when you run the model, it's not picking up 30 meters on each side of the thing because the model is reflecting what's actually out there. That's the intention of the model anyway. So if there's a ditch out there right now that does not have a 30-meter wide permanent vegetation, it didn't get picked up in the map because the model wouldn't have caught it because it's not there today as a riparian area or a meadow or a thicket.
Susanna's got her hand up.
Yeah, I'm just quickly opening the document, Councillor Wilhelm, that you are referring to. So I believe this is in the Natural Heritage System Study. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so what the Natural Heritage System Study does is it defines the area that the lands that are considered ecologically significant. So the way that the Conservation Authority staff do this, it's a scientific document and it's prepared at the landscape level. So if you think that what it's trying to do is define what is significant, then that criteria is used as one of the criteria of significance. So if there, let me just open it again. If there is a vegetation group, so that could be a woodlot, or it could be a thicket, and it's within 30 meters of a watercourse, then that means irrelevant of how big it is it's considered significant, and then it would be brought forward to the mapping in the natural environment designation. Does that make sense? So what the entire model, the entire Natural Heritage System Study is doing is it's relying on the scientific literature, which is, you can see, is extensive. Like a lot of academics have spent a lot of time, and scientists, defining what is significant ecologically at a landscape level. So what they've come up with is that if there is a natural environment feature and it's close to a watercourse, then simply by being close to that watercourse, that ecological feature is important. So it's not so much about the buffer around the watercourse. It's that if there is a watercourse in proximity, or if there is a natural environment feature in close proximity to that watercourse, that environmental feature is significant. Does that make sense?
Councillor Wilhelm?
No, this is on its own. It doesn't refer to any metals or any adjoining properties or vegetation. It strictly centers out open water courses. And to me, without it saying integrated with woodlot or something else, this to me says strictly open water courses and riparian vegetation 30 meters on both sides.
Okay, well, I should spend more time on it, but just let me share what I'm looking at here.
Actually, just before you do that, I know exactly what Councillor Wilhelm's saying,
Okay,
because different farmers have read that natural heritage study to begin with, and that was one thing they all pointed out to me almost instantly. So I think we need to get clarification as to Sally's version of her view of this versus what it's saying in that original study. Because if it does say 30 meters in there, maybe our planners today would say that's not the case, but the planners tomorrow might say it was. We need clarification on that distance. And I see Councillor Duncan had his hand up there.
I was just going to make the comment that I think when we all get to see the mapping, I think a lot of this is going to be a lot more clear to us once we get to see the mapping. And I think we're going to have another discussion once we all get a chance to look at the mapping.
I tend to agree that Councillor Wright had his hand up there once too.
He doesn't have much to say, but one thing that's different is in town, we're talking here in rural, so we have to really divide that. You can build a new house 25 feet from the river if it so fits, because you have sewer. You can't build a house 25 feet. But at that meeting, and I believe that meeting was in August in Moncton, if anybody can shake their head, the first meeting we had of this, the question was asked, a man-made ditch is not a natural heritage waterway. That was brought up right at the start by this idiot right here. Asked the question, you can put a ditch wherever you want to make it go. So that was never clarified right from back in August. Somebody will remember what year it was. 19, 18? 18, Todd, mouth to me. Yeah, so 19. That was one of the things we had asked, because it's not natural, it's a man-made. So I can put a ditch on the west side of my farm, or I can dig one on the east side of my farm. First question was when all the farmers were there, I remember it was a protest. They all came, they said, that's 100 feet on each side of the ditch. But we can't farm. That's what it said. Bob just read it. And it was, we don't know. So that's got to be decided. We did at that meeting say anything that is not mandatory under the provincial policy statement, we wouldn't look at. So Sally, to ask you that question, you said to, I think it was Rhonda, what do you mean? Well, if it wasn't mandatory under the provincial policy statement, we weren't gonna pursue it. So now we've been 3 years, we're getting close to 3 years, and we're no further, but we're going over and above again, which is great, but we shouldn't focus on the non-mandatory things. We have a framework we have to sit inside. Let's sit inside that. This is going to change everywhere. You just said that everybody can appeal it, right, Sally? If I think I can plant some trees against the ditch, I can maybe move my barn a little closer. I don't know if that's what you meant by that, but this is going to be an ever-evolving, ever-changing document. Everybody's going to come and ask for, I'll call it a minor variance to it or something. So that's where I see this going. See it being a huge forever, people coming and asking, but we just need to sit with Matt and get the map. And I think the way everybody's so agitated today, you might have all 2,700 people come and ask you to look at their farm. And I did the math, and I believe it would take one person 77 weeks at just an hour a site visit to go out and look at them on a 35-hour work week. So I'd like to see Matt's suggestion. We get the map. We see if the man-made ditches are in there or if they're not included, was my question in 2019. Still my question. Thank you.
I'm going back to Susanna here next.
I'm sorry, I don't have anything else to say.
Okay, yes, Deputy Warden Agates.
Doug, I brought a very good point up, and that's what I was going to say too. These are man-made ditches. They were meant to drain our properties. They weren't meant to house species and fish and turtles and everything else. That's just happened over time. They were dug to drain our property. Going back to what Todd said as well, the cost, right? The more natural, and I know the natural heritage is important, but the more it's there, the more cost the landowner bears. And we just saw that in Perth East. We had a gentleman who wanted to build onto his shed, his window business, and he had to change the configuration of his building to a really stupid way because he didn't want to build it on the natural heritage spot because he was going to have extra permit fees, extra studies that have to be done. Like that all takes time, and that all takes a lot of money. So we're adding on to the ratepayers' costs to try to do anything as well. And you'll find that people don't want to do that. Like Hugh will tell you sometimes that the conservation, they just rubber stamp the permits. They get $200 out of some of our ratepayers, and why, right? Because they can. And I don't agree with that. If there's a really good reason and something that needs to happen, but just because it happens to be in a watershed, we have to jump through 10 more hoops to get what they want. And in the end, they get it, but they've had to do all this extra to get there. So we want to make it as easy as possible for our ratepayers to go through the process and not make it so complicated.
Councillor Hurlick?
I know just two parts here. So that barn you're talking about there earlier, Sally, by the public school, I'll tell you this right now. The whole side of that township is aware of what's going on and people are concerned. The talk is everywhere. Second part, I'll just put this in here. I've sat in a live forum and listened to a gentleman who dairy farmed near Milton about 15 years ago, whose whole farm was destroyed by natural heritage study. And he did it to himself. He got all kinds of awards. He put in all kinds of tree buffers, windbreaks, and it got to the point where he couldn't even put in a septic for his dairy barn milk house because it was too close to significant woodlands and connective features. He couldn't get to the other side of a ditch to put a concrete basin to rebuild it because it triggered the study, because he had planted a whole bunch of windbreaks on the other side as well. And it's just everything he went to do became so insane. He sold the farm. And these are the things that we're worried about. And again, we had great lengthy conversation around these thickets and meadows and not putting them in there. And Perth County is aware of this. And I think we're just going to bury ourselves. We're going to be using the jailhouse for a planning office. We're not going to have enough room. I've got my concerns. We can make this a lot easier. Off the hop right away. Thank you.
I think Councillor Wright, Councillor Duncan hit the nail on the head. You need to see the mapping before you can really jump to any conclusions here, but Councillor Wilhelm has his hand up, I believe.
Yeah, just further to that 30 meters. Well, the county may be under the understanding of one way. Conservation authorities have said water courses are any open that has water flow. So therefore, this could be regulated by the conservation authorities in Perth County, might not even have any say on it. So that's where I think we really need to be concerned.
Other questions? I got a couple comments. And I'm just going to add on to what Councillor Wilhelm just said. Drainage was not, cropping and drainage was not supposed to be affected by any of this. And anybody who's on a lower tier council that is involved in municipal drainage knows that the conservation authorities are making that about as difficult as possible to move forward with a project. And some of the worst examples are you'll have people that want to actually close in an open drainage ditch, which is the best thing you can do for water quality, and they'll refuse to allow that to happen. And that part I have never figured out why. I believe Councillor McDermott sits in the upper Thames and he knows exactly what I'm referring to there. And he's nodding his head up and down. And that's one of my comments. And I've made a bunch of notes and some of them got answered already, but the one that really intrigued me was the 2,700 responses you think you're going to get back. So that's basically, 1% or an acre, right? And that, I think that what's going to solve that problem is the ground truthing, because a lot of those designations have changed since the late 90s with no correspondence or consultation with any of the property owners. And hopefully that's going to take place now and get this solved once and for all, because that has happened. Oh, and the other thing is, and Councillor Wilhelm knows exactly where I'm going to go with this one. So we're going to do all this, and we need to do a lot of this. I'm not going to say all of it. We need to do a lot to improve the water quality. But I still take issue with the fact that the city of London or the city of Stratford can bypass raw sewage into the river, which is the same water course that our water from our farms goes into Lake Erie. And they're not really getting a handle on it. They expect only the rural areas to get a handle on it. And I still take umbrage with that, and I've addressed it at higher levels, but I know we need to improve water quality, but for the little bit of water quality we're gonna improve doing all this in natural heritage stands and plans and studies is gonna be a drop in the bucket compared to what the cities do to destroy your water quality. Councillor Duncan.
Just one comment in regards to the water quality stuff, Jim Warden Aitchison. It's not just water quality. There's a big aspect to the whole natural heritage protection too, not just involving water quality. I would suggest that every councillor here pick up a copy of the book that Sally had in her presentation. It's quite telling when you get to see the pictures and the story of not very many years ago times that book shows in what tree cover and protection of our natural heritage features actually does to benefit agriculture and soil as well.
Well, I agree with you 100%, Councillor Duncan, and that was my next point I was going to bring up. So most people that own farms or whatever do their best to preserve their farmland. They plant windbreaks. I plant trees every year. Unfortunately, I've had a lot of ash trees die in the last few years, so we're playing catch up again. But the part that alarms me too is you'll go into a neighboring community where they'll whack down trees left, right, and center to put up a subdivision. So again, we need more tree cover because that is what's changing your climate to some degree. And I know I wasn't really a strong supporter of climate change, but after what I've seen that's happened in the world in the last 2 years, and wind events, rain events, snow events, heat events, something's definitely changing, and it's not for the better. Anyway, other comments or questions? Sally.
Yeah, we have been around a few different circles now where natural hazard and permitting through the CA and natural environment and the adjacent lands and the trigger forest study get confused with each other. And they're very different things. They're two different systems of legislation. There are two different requirements, and there's two different sort of targets at the end. So with hazard lands, that's really about flooding and erosion hazards, and that's squarely in the jurisdiction of the Conservation Authority. And if you're proposing a development inside those hazard lands, then yeah, you have to work through them to get a permit. But what we're talking about here is natural heritage. And if you're proposing development within those adjacent lands or even within the natural heritage feature itself, in some cases, what we're talking about is an action, a system where you would consider the impact, you'd mitigate it as much as possible. You would use the information that you learned through the exercise to inform the design or the location of the development that you're proposing. And you would figure out ways and possibilities that the development and the natural environment can both occur. And at the end, you're not seeking a permit, you're seeking approval on your land use planning application, which this council gets to decide at the official plan level, and which you as councilors get to decide at the zoning level. So that's what we're talking about, two different systems. And the reason I'm sort of belaboring this, I think, is because in order to have a good public consultation, we really need to differentiate between the two things because it confuses the conversation over and over again. And a permit from the Conservation Authority in a hazard land is not the same thing as natural heritage in an official plan, where you're evaluating your impact on a natural feature that's part of an important system that protects us from flooding and does other things in our community, and figuring out this coexistence piece before you proceed with development and come to the council for a decision on your development proposal. So two different systems, two different things. And I think the map, I think you're all hitting I think you're all right. The map is going to help you to understand a little better that the study itself has produced a map, and the map does not have a 30-meter buffer on every water course, whether it's man-made or natural. That's not showing up in the maps. And what we're proposing here is to take the map itself and use it as a tool in our official plan to identify when we need to have that conversation about, do you need to do a study or do you not need to do a study? What's the magnitude of your development? How close are you to this feature? Which kind of feature is it? And have those conversations with people. And I'd like to get you more information on, not only bring you the map, of course, but I get you some more information on what does an EIS, an ecological or environmental impact study look like? What are the kinds of things that it talks about? And maybe we could even get to figuring out how much they might cost for different types of development. And you know, the county has put a lot of resources into achieving this goal that the PPS sets out of identifying a natural system, trying to figure out what's ecologically significant. And we did it. And so we would also be putting resources into this conversation, the public engagement, any kinds of ecological support we need to figure out, you know, if the map is incorrect. And that gets us to a system. So the investment is made in the official plan document, in the policy that's in there, and the map that's in there. And at the time that a development comes forward, typically the fashion that we have proceeded in is development pays for development. And so if they do need to do a study, we will absolutely intend, and the system intends to tailor it, the scope of it to the development, and that will have a direct influence on costs. But that it is the cost of developing something in those adjacent lands or in a natural environment feature.
Well, I agree with you completely that it is two different, completely separate entities we're dealing with here, or whatever. I think perhaps part of the problem is the confusion between the two. But I'm going to also make the comment, maybe I'll get slapped upside the head for it, but the conservation authorities don't seem to view it that way for the most part that we deal with in Perth South. And they're kind of more overbearing and overriding to the point where they've already implemented a lot of the things that is in this proposed natural heritage study that haven't even been approved yet.
In what regulatory system are they implementing it? That's sort of my question is, you know, how are they using the information that's in there? And what authority are they using it under?
Well, Councillor McDermott might be able to answer that question better, but they just tend to have the attitude where they are the all authority, take it or leave it. Councillor Wilhelm had his hand up there.
Yeah, just I totally agree with Sally that the natural hazard and natural heritage are two different things. However, as you just mentioned, the conservation authorities will look at this natural heritage and tell farmers what they can and can't do based on this. And when perhaps it should be the natural hazard that they should be looking at. And we've already, as Jim mentioned, we've already seen this coming into play and it's creating problems. And I think that if we can't get this clear in the natural heritage, conservation authorities are not going to look at your maps. They're going to look at this in writing and say, it says 30 meters from a water course. And I think we have to have it clear in writing.
Deputy Ward Dacus has got her hand up.
So just going back to Jim's comment, we had a situation already in Perth East. We had a farmer who wanted to build a barn or a shed, and he was told that he was in a watershed. He'd never, ever been in a watershed before. And they said, oh, this is a new mapping. They're using the new mapping already. So as he commented, they already think that this is a given. They're already using the features, even though we haven't passed it. And we had to get our local MPP involved in order to get that building permit for that farmer. So yeah, it is happening, whether you think it is or not.
Other comments or questions? Councillor Hurley?
No, last thing here again. No, we'll just finish off here again. I stay steadfast. We'll get the maps here, but as we go forward and implement
Back down to that old computer there, would you, Darryl?
what's final, what we do decide is final here. The fence, the meadows, the connective features, we had lengthy discussion on that. Again, we want to encourage people to build tree lines. We don't want them to find out, oh, maybe, or, oh, this planner looks at it this way, that one this way. That's where this ends up. I've seen it. I know how it goes. I've sat in the meetings. I've watched people's lives destroyed by natural heritage systems. And yes, we need to recognize a few. Again, we have hazards that the Conservation Authority is playing out, and I have no issues with that. But the whole connective feature situation, and there's too much loose ends. I mean, 10 years from now, the new planner looks at it, well, it's within so far of this feature, boom, triggers a study, and you're just waiting and waiting and waiting within bureaucracy. So we'll go forward, but anyways, thank you.
Okay, I think, Councillor Katzenberg got a hand up there.
Just an observation, Mr. Warden, and perhaps planning can help us with this. I've heard a fair amount of comment in the last few moments about conservation authorities and their roles in and perhaps overreach or concerns about overreach of their roles. And it makes sense to me that at this point, we probably need to draw them back in to our process and have a pretty frank discussion about the way we're looking at this, because when I hear reports that have been suggested, I think Deputy Warden Agats mentioned of farm owners being impacted already by sort of policies that are not yet enabled. I get a little bit worried about that. And so perhaps there's an opportunity again to sort of raise, based on the discussion that this council has had today with the conservation authorities, some of the concerns and how they should be approaching any engagement or interpretation around this at this point in time.
Okay, I think part of that process has already started, Councillor Katzenberg, with the province of Ontario and some of the things that we're doing with conservation authorities, but it's far from done. But you're correct about the discussion. Okay. Sally?
Yeah, I just wanted to put some more, I think, fodder out there for consideration so that councilors are thinking through this and we can talk about it again. The study that was done has created a map. I mean, it created a model, actually, is what it did. And the model was used to create a map. Once we use that map in our official plan, or if we use that map in our official plan, it becomes a different thing almost. It is now an official plan designation. And so the official plan policies are what apply to that map once it's in the official plan, not some other thing that the Conservation Authority is or isn't doing. And the county undertook the study in order to map the ecologically significant areas in the county, because we need to do that for our official plan. So I think what we're kind of going around here is we want to use the map that we got to update the plan. And if we don't intend to use the study because of something the Conservation Authority is doing in a different realm, in a different jurisdiction, using that information, then what solution will we come up with then for our official plan?
Okay, I don't see any hands up. I know I got a couple councillors that are committed for 3 o'clock. So I've got a motion here that Perth County Council receives the council education session Natural Heritage Systems Planning Report in preparation for the session. Moved by Councillor Katzenberg, seconded by Councillor Duncan. Those in favor? That's carried. Council reports? Nothing. Bylaws? Nothing. Notice of motions? We have nothing. Announcements? Do we have any announcements? Not seeing any hands. Closed session, we don't have. Confirmatory bylaw. Bylaw number 3856-2022, being a bylaw to confirm the proceedings of the Council of the Corporation of the County of Perth at its regular meeting held February 10th, 2022, is read a first, second, and third time, and finally passed February 10th, 2022. Moved by Councillor Callum, seconded by Councillor McKenzie. Those in favor? And that's carried. And I have a motion that the special council meeting adjourn at 2:50. Moved by Councillor Wilhelm, seconded by Councillor McDermott. Those in favor? That's carried. Perfect. Thank you very much. We've had some good discussion.